Guys, we've got two more questions. I've taken a lot of your time and I want to thank you so much. It's been such a valuable conversation thus far. And we're going to get into something maybe a little bit more controversial now. In your opinion, what is one of, or maybe there's one, maybe there's more, biggest cultural divide? Or have you been shocked by any cultural sort of, how would I explain it? Yeah, when it comes to money in other cultures. So I'll give you an example to kickstart the conversation. But as a young Muslim colored woman in South Africa, I've always been amazed at this level of entitlement amongst colored youth. Okay. Now I'm talking about my generation and I'm talking about my opinion based on people I have encountered. So this is not to generalize, but I found that kids of parents who struggled financially, who came from apartheid, who lived in District 6, have this mentality of, you must give me. My parents struggled. I don't want to work for anything. So, you own me. And I think it's my own culture, but I think that's something that I have tried really hard to work against in my community. And so I think that would possibly be one of the things that kind of really shocked me. And not at once, obviously, it's people that I've encountered over years, people that went to school with me. And so that was very interesting for me, is how no one really, or the people that I'm talking about, didn't really want to work for it. And I suppose we come from different backgrounds, so we have no idea what led them to that space. But just the way in which they then explained it basically came down to, no, I need a handout. I deserve a handout. So Yazid, I'm going to start with you. Is there anything across cultures perhaps, or even in your own culture, that has really shocked you when it comes to financial advice or habits of any sort?
Well, to be honest, I think if I speak out of our culture, or my culture specifically, if I look at sort of the way that we've been raised, because obviously it was hand to mouth, it was financially difficult, I guess. The eldest would always be the first one to start helping out with the family finances. So my eldest brother, for example, he was the first one that matriculated, got a job, and I mean automatically his salary was absorbed into the household. Where of course in other cultures, if things were kind of sorted, not necessarily other cultures but other family and other households as well, it could be that if you're working for the first time, you're putting either the money into yourself, I guess, maybe a bit of spoils, but naturally probably you wouldn't be working, you'd probably be studying, at that time. Where in my situation, there wasn't necessarily that money that was put aside for any of the kids to go study, or not a lot of conversation regarding that. Not that we were unfortunate, I guess, in terms of going to go study. We were never held back in that sense, but financially we knew there was always a bit of a restriction. So I guess, whoever is the oldest in the household, they would start immediately helping out. I was again fortunate in the sense that I was the youngest, and I could actually put some money aside or actually go study a bit. But I think that's one of the big cultural shocks, is that when I spoke to friends and people in different races, etc., it was different. The money that they got, they could go study, they could go, or they could study even with their parents' money, and that was wow, how did you ever get that? Or they got a bursary, and maybe I wasn't even exposed to these kind of things. So I think that's the big shock. It is a blessing, obviously, for what we believe, for our siblings to have done that. And we don't see it as a disadvantage in any way, but I mean, there is two sides to the coin, and you kind of think, should that money have been completely theirs for that 5 years? What could they have accomplished?
Yazid, you mentioned such an important thing, because I, for one, didn't have that. I didn't experience that. My dad was like, you're living under my roof. I want you to save what you would have paid for rent, and I want you to save that. So as much as they struggled, I never felt that burden being the eldest. What's also interesting, though, is that I also have seen, and in my own situation, that the issues that can arise between siblings because of that. So in my situation, I finished school first, but because my results were good, I managed to get an NSFAS loan, which I had to pay back myself. Unfortunately, my brother, who didn't perhaps excel at school, didn't have that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so he always blamed my father for not going the extra mile for him to go study. And he's greatly successful now, but it did cause friction between my brother and I, because I was deemed to be the spoiled one when he didn't understand that I was having to pay that money back myself. So very interesting. I resonate with that quite a lot.
Yeah, the friction is always there, I think, because like even similarly with my with one of my sisters that's maybe just 2 years younger than him, like when she started working, does she give as much as what the elder's done? He expects, okay, I gave this much, you should also give this much, and obviously that's not the case because we're at different times or different areas in our lives. She might be focused on getting married. My brother's still focused on how to get the two youngest out of school, for example. So yeah, there's different views to it.
Very interesting. Hania, any culture shock over there for you?
Yeah, there is one. It's not a bad one necessarily. So again, similar to you, just based off my experience and chats with other people, and it's maybe not necessarily just the white culture. I just see it more often there than anywhere else. Is this, you're 18 now, you need to move out.
Yes.
And you need to find your own place, you need to sort out your own food. Whereas I suppose the flip side to Yazid's coin is, growing up Muslim and colored and female, I live in my parents' house. They make sure I have food. We contribute if we can to the household. But it's almost like they let you off on your own and just like do with it what you will. That's a bit of a shock, because 18. Depending on how much exposure you've had to finances before, like finding your own place. Do you get a roommate? How do you budget for food? Is it 2-minute noodles? Is it a student life? Are you studying? How do you pay for your studies? It's different. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm sure it works for some people and it doesn't work for other people. But it was quite a concept to wrap my head around.
That's interesting. So Rick, I'm actually going to jump to you now. Do you maybe want to weigh in on that? Because it's also something that I've heard. Oh no, like it's almost unheard of in my circles. So I'm not going to generalize, but in my circles, a lot of my white friends left their parents' house. It was just a thing. That's just what you did. Is that the same in your experience, Rick?
100%, and not exactly the same in my experience per se. I think I left home, probably a year later, like 19-ish. But still, it's strange. It's almost like it's a cultural thing, but it's almost like a perception type of thing to say that you're now an adult and you've got to take care of yourself and you've got to move out of your parents' home and you've got to like make a path for yourself. And so I think maybe even from, a parent's perspective, it's almost like you've got to set them up for success and make sure that they can take care of themselves as opposed to, the opposite of keeping them at home the entire time. And so I can see a certain positive in terms of the intention, but at the same time, there's a massive amount of positive to actually staying with family, saving up the entire time, not having to pay rent, not having to feel like, you can't take care of things. So there's a weird dynamic at play, and I think part of the perception issue, I'm going to bring something else into this because I've noticed it a lot in my culture as well. People have a thing about perception's one thing, but then there's also status symbols. So, and I feel like that is, and maybe not just in my culture, but I feel like it's a South African thing in general. And I'll bring a weird example into this. Is a couple of years back, I went to, I had the privilege of just visiting the United States for a bit, and it was interesting just to see cultural difference. You speak about cultural shock. So you literally go out onto the roads, and I got to drive on the opposite end of the road, which on its own is a shock. You can imagine. I actually woke up one particular morning and I was driving on the wrong side of the road, guys, and then there was a car coming right towards me. Fun times. Anyway, so one other shock to me was just the fact that you literally do not see fancy cars anywhere. Like it was rare for me to see a Merc. It was very rare for me to see a BMW, an Audi. Those cars were not on the roads. And it's crazy. And it was something I took notice of because the moment I got back to South Africa, all of a sudden it was like galore, And I realized, wait a second, it's actually a bit of a status thing to understand that it's almost like if I get to a point where this is what I have as a possession, I'm elevated to a certain point, whether it's just a perception thing and whether I actually do have the money to buy X, Y, and Z, it's a real shock and problem to a certain extent. And it's not just that. It's which type of restaurants do I go to? Which friends do I hang out with? You know, which areas am I seen in? And it's something that I have seen in my culture, but I feel like it's also a South African thing in general. Like if I can show that I have these things, why I can portray this particular type of image, you know, I'm at this level, and yeah, it's a bit of a shock.
Sure, very interesting. Wow, Afia, anything from you on that front in terms of culture shock?
I guess for me, it's so weird, but it's the opposite of what Hanya said. So I grew up in a white suburb. I went to a predominantly white school. So my entire environment was people with either money or come out of like a white culture, right? So I'm used to, when you turn 18, it's not like go off on your own. It's like your parents will get you an apartment, or they'd put you in res, or you go and you do your gap year overseas, and you go figure, you know what I mean? It's never like go out on your own and figure it out. There's a lot of support. There's an incredible amount of support, but you're not living with your parents anymore. I actually noticed that a lot with my Black friends, but my Black friends were international. You didn't come from South Africa, so you're not with your family. So when you are going to varsity, you are having to live in res or in a digs or in a wherever. So that's the environment I come out of. So when I started making friends with more colored people, especially people who were colored and came from like a Malay background, Muslim background, and this idea of you get married and you still live in your family's home, like they build an extension of the house for you to live in with the whole family, her sister and her husband and brother and his wife. So there's like 3 children living in this house, and like everybody's got. That blew my whole mind. I was like, oh my God, like I can't, like, no, that freaks me out still to this day.
Yes.
I do not get it. I'm just like, the distance I want to put between me and my family is huge.
Yeah.
I don't understand it. But yeah, like that was actually the massive culture shock for me. It wasn't actually the moving away, it was the staying at home with everybody under the same roof.
Wow, that's incredible. It actually brings me back to what Yazid said earlier, and I think it comes from especially the colored community, like that District 6 community. And if you've ever read stories about District 6, it was known for my child is your child, a community of united people fighting the same fight, going through the same struggles. And all they had was each other. So there was always a strong sense of family. And so when their kids had kids, there was always this need for some colored people to kind of hold on to having their sons and their daughters close to home, because they know what it feels like to be separated. And so I also had to think about that, had to wrap my head around that as well. So guys, we're coming to our last question. And Afia, I'm going to start with you. If you could go back and ask or give yourself one financial lesson, like a younger version of you, those who look like you or share in the same culture, what would that be?
It'll definitely be, don't allow people to assume how you need to spend your money or not to spend your money. Because the fact that I was Black, everybody assumed that I came out of a family that struggled. So therefore I'm supposed to be better about my spending. Or because of the fact that I went to a fancy school, people are like, but why do you save? Like, your parents have money, like, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of assumptions were placed on my life because of the way I sounded, because of the way I look, because of the environment, because of how I presented myself. There were a lot of assumptions about the way I should then present myself to the world. And a lot of that has to do with money. It's the handbag that I'm going to buy so people think that I can afford a Gucci, or it's the Adidas shoes that I'm going to wear, or it's the makeup that I'm going to put on my face that isn't going to melt when I walk out into the sun. You know what I mean? It's like all of those things. There was a lot of assumptions made about me, and therefore it forced me to try and put myself out into the world, especially a certain way. And so the advice I'd give to my younger self is don't allow people's assumptions to alter the way you want to live your life.
That's incredible. And I think that's something that we can all really say to our younger selves. Because I think all of us, to some degree, there's perceptions placed on all of us. What we look like, what we sound like. I know it's weird. When I used to have sleepovers with my cousin in Mitchell's Plain, I was referred to as the white cousin because of the way I spoke. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. It blew my mind. And then I came to a house in Grassy Park. If any of you know what Grassy Park is, it's like, it's like Mitchell's Plain. But it's crazy. It really is crazy. Hania, any advice for a younger version of you? Financial advice?
I think I just told them to just educate themselves, ask questions. I don't know if any of you know, but I never stop asking questions. And I mean, even if someone doesn't want to answer you, there are ways for you to find out things that you need to find out responsibly. And just educate yourself. I mean, why couldn't they teach us how to do tax in high school? Like, how many times did I have to do my CV over and over and over again? Just educate yourself. I mean, we have the tools at our disposal now. Internet's at our fingertips responsibly. Just do your homework.
That's great, Hania. I think you make a very valid point that the time and the era is so different. And I remember as a child having to go to the library when I needed information. You used to go page through all those encyclopedias. Yes, you do know exactly what I'm talking about. We'd sit at the wooden benches and just page through and find what we needed to. And I think, one, it's made a lot of us lazier. And I think, Rick, you've mentioned this in a past interview, where the plethora of options, I think that was like the defining thing that stood out for me, is that there's so many options. And yes, it's enough to go like, oh, I don't know where to start. But people back then, like, they literally didn't know where to start because there was nothing in front of them. So I think we should use what we have to our advantage. Definitely. So very good point, Hania. Yazid, do you have any financial lessons to a younger you?
Yeah, I think I got two strong ones. I think one leading off what Hania said. Financial education, very, very important. You don't learn enough of it at school. I have nieces and nephews and my girlfriend's sisters that still might be in school and still like looking through their schoolwork. It doesn't prepare you for what you're going to do with your income when you're older. And you don't have that strong saving or financial saving mindset when you leave and you're actually getting your first income. So that's the one thing. Learn about what the banks offer, what's the conditions, pros, cons, etc. when it comes to loans, things like credit cards, because all those things will be at your disposal when you start earning something. And secondly, it would be, live within your band. I speak from personal experience because I was fortunately promoted quite quickly in my previous role. And I was sitting with a lot of seniors, and you kind of start liking what they like. You start having different kind of conversations, and you know, just because this person has this car and you might be in the same position, you feel that you need the same, but you're in a different stage in your life completely. So I think know who you are, know what your goals are, and then be diligent in and not necessarily looking around you. In what others have, stick to your goals and spin that way. Yeah.
That's great. And I think that also talks to the era that we're in with social instant gratification. And I think, Rika, this is something that you've actually touched on in the past as well, is that it becomes harder and harder. I watch my daughter as well. She watches these TikTok videos and stuff, and there's fancy unicorn lights that go on and off, and I'm like let's be realistic, so 100% I agree with you there. Rick, let's end with you.
Yeah, that actually brings me to that specific thing. Two things I would say to myself would be stay away from instant gratification, because it's not going to get you anywhere, and focus on what is truly important to you. Define what's important and focus on that thing. Because I think we honestly live in a society right now where marketing is so strong, and it can be for good, it can be for bad as well, but so strong to a certain extent that everything is elevated to the highest level of importance. So me getting this particular product for me right now is so important. And somebody has that option. Me getting protection in terms of credit life or funeral cover, whatever the case is, that's also important. Me making sure that I have food on the table for my family, that's also important. But the way that these things are marketed are all marketed to such an extent that everything is so important. So how do you make a calculated decision? For me, it's defining what's most important. And if I knew that when I was super young, when I didn't have to spend money on things that were not important, Rick. Those things would have been helpful. But I think I would say that to anybody right now, and especially just the generation to come, things aren't going to get easier when it comes to this type of thing. People are going to get more intelligent when it comes to marketing and products and all sorts of things. So defining what's important in terms of value and what you hold dear to yourself, that'll get someone very far today. Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. This has been an incredible session. I want to thank you so much for your time, for sharing so openly, and really just highlighting, like I said in the beginning, how diverse and wonderfully different we all are. And I think that just respect for one another, and being open to listening, without judgment, without perceptions, and just listening to understand as opposed to respond, is really what drove this conversation. So I want to thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion.
Thanks, Shafika.
Thank you,
fun.
guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Guys.